Here's a couple more quotes by H.L. Mencken. The plain fact is that education is itself a form of propaganda, a deliberate scheme to outfit the pupil, not with the capacity to weigh ideas, but with a simple appetite for gulping ideas ready-made. The aim is to make good citizens, which is to say docile and uninquisitive citizens. Totally true there, I believe. Another one by Aldous Huxley says there will be in the next generation or so a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods, and this seems to be the final revolution. Malcolm X said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people that are doing the oppressing. Great quote there. I'm sure you've all heard Adolf Hitler's quote, make it the lie big enough, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. We move on to a great quote from the movie The Principle by Michio Kaku, who said, usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say something's wrong with the theory, we're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120th. That is a 1 with 120 zeros after it. This is the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science. This is a extremely important quote, one of the quotes that made me into a flat earther, really, because here is George Ellis, who's top 5 or 10 physicists in the world. And when I saw this quote, I said, man, people need to understand this. He says, people need to be aware of that there is a range of models that could explain the observations. For instance, I can construct you a spherically symmetrical universe with Earth at its center. So notice he's saying he can construct for you a spherically symmetrical universe with the Earth at its center, and you cannot disprove it based on observations. Like what? I thought that all observations show that we are a heliocentric world and that the Earth spins and that all these tests have showed us. Why is this physicist saying that you can't tell the difference? And then he says you can only exclude it on philosophical grounds. Basically, the idea that the Earth can't possibly be the center of the universe, folks. It can't possibly. That's what science has already undertaken as their main axiom, the foundation of everything they teach you. What I would like to bring into the open is the fact that we are using philosophical criteria in choosing our models. A lot of cosmology tries to hide that. So remember, we're told about science and how great it is and the scientific method. And here's a physicist who's telling you a lot of cosmology tries to hide that. What? Science is trying to hide something from you? What happened to the science that we were all taught in school? This is completely different. This is men's worldview trying to hide from you. I don't know if people know that Einstein said this, but if the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts. So that's an easy way to make the Earth move. Edwin Hubble. He says such a condition would imply that we occupy a unique position in the universe. Again, he's looking out, seeing these galaxies move away from us, saying we must be in a unique position. Analogous, in a sense, to the ancient conception of a central Earth. The hypothesis cannot be disproved. So it cannot be disproved that we're the center of the universe, but it is unwelcome and would be accepted only as a last resort in order to save the phenomenon. Therefore, we disregard this possibility and consider the alternative, namely a distribution which thins out with distance. A thinning would be readily explained in either of two ways. He talked about space absorption. We go on and on and on and on. But then he says, both explanations seem plausible, but neither is permitted by the observations. So again, these guys are just making things up and saying, but the damn thing about it is they don't meet our observations. So then what he says, the apparent departures from uniformity in the world picture are fully compensated by the minimum possible corrections for redshifts in any interpretation. No margin is left for a thinning out. The true distribution must either be uniform or increase outward, leaving the observer in a unique position. But the unwelcome supposition of a favored position, so remember, but the unwelcome idea that we are the center of the universe must be avoided at all costs. This is science, ladies and gentlemen. This is science that are supposed to be based off the scientific method, not a bunch of men sitting around deciding which things must be avoided at all costs. This isn't even science. And it says such a favored position, like the Earth being the center of the universe, is of course intolerable. Therefore, in order to restore homogeneity and to escape the horror of a unique position. This is science, folks. Oh, to escape the horror of being the apple of God's eye, to escape the horror of being in a unique position, they have to ignore it. They have to get rid of it. They can't even think of that being the truth. So then you can get into a little bit of the Albert Michelson talking about his experiment that says this conclusion directly contradicts the explanation which presupposes that the Earth moves. So we've got the person who did the experiment saying, nope, the Earth doesn't move, not in our experiments. You've got physicist Arthur Eddington saying there was only one alternative. The Earth's true velocity through space might happen to be nil. Again, these are physicists. These are guys doing the experiments. You've got the data of Michelson-Morley were almost unbelievable. There was only one other possible conclusion to draw, that the Earth was at rest. Physicist Bernard Jaffe. I put another quote in here from physicist John D. Norton, who said Michelson and Morley found shifts in the interference fringes, but they were very much smaller than the size of the effect expected from the known orbital motion of the Earth. Again, this is a hilarious quote because in here it says the effect expected from the known orbital motion of the Earth. So again, they're presupposing, this is exactly what I pointed out earlier when you're talking about Praetatio Principii. Let's go a little bit further here. And this quote by physicist Douglas Giaconoli said, this null result was one of the greatest puzzles of physics at the end of the 19th century. One possibility that velocity would be zero and no fringe shift would be expected, but this implies that the Earth is somehow a preferred object. Only with respect to the Earth would the speed of light be c. This is tantamount to assuming that the Earth is the central body of the universe. So even though TESS is showing that, these guys are scared shitless about it. Einstein, to the question of whether or not the motion of the Earth in space can be made perceptible in terrestrial experiments. So this is kind of the main crux of the whole argument here. He's saying, if you're talking about whether or not the motion of Earth in space can be made perceptible in some of our experiments, we've already remarked that all attempts of this nature have led to a negative result, meaning we've already tried testing it and the Earth doesn't move. Before the theory of relativity was put forward, it was difficult to become reconciled in this negative result. And the theory of relativity is the one that employs the transform equations, the one that says, the arm of the apparatus is shortened, the time is dilated, the mass is contracted. These are mathematical equations that have never been proven and yet must be employed to make the Earth move. Let's continue a little further. Excuse me. Albert Einstein said here, soon I came to the conclusion that our idea about the motion of Earth with respect to the ether is incorrect. If we admit Michelson's null result as fact, this was the first path which led me to special relativity. Again, just pointing out that you have Einstein who came in after the Michelson-Morley experiments proved that the Earth didn't move, and he used his ideas, his mathematical equations, his conceptions in his mind to erase what the tests had shown. Okay, let's go a little bit further. As we can see here, it's all done by mathematics. There's not one iota of physical empirical proof to that theory that time dilates, length contracts, mass contracts. Go a little bit further here. Einstein said later, I've come to the belief that the motion of the Earth cannot be detected by any optical experiment, though the Earth is revolving around the sun. This is what I was talking about. When you've got a foundational belief, which they call the Copernican model, the Copernican idea, this is the Copernican idea that they've already assumed, they've already started from their conclusion with the fact that the Earth moves and goes around the sun. So every test that they're doing, they try and fit into that box. And when it doesn't, they add mathematic equations to make it work. That's the point of the video. A little bit further here, we've got Albert Michelson. We read that one already. The conclusion directly contradicts the explanation, which presupposes that the Earth moves. Again, this is just to kind of finish it off. You got a little quote here about relativity. Talks about, according to special relativity, there is no absolute space or absolute time. So if two objects are moving relative to each other in empty space, it would accurately be impossible for an observer to tell an absolute velocity. Maybe only one of those objects was moving and the other was stationary, for example. But you wouldn't know which was true because their movements are relative to each other, not to any external reference frame, assuming the reference frame is not accelerating. So we've got a problem here. Again, what they're saying is that, well, according to relativity, which is what Einstein brought around, there is no way to ever tell which is actually happening. Whether you're on the Earth, it may look the sun is moving around you. If you're on the sun, it would look like the Earth's moving around you. So he came up with this idea of relativity. But if relativity was true, then they couldn't teach in schools which one is actually happening. But again, go to any classroom, go to any physicist, go to any science buff, and ask them whether the Earth spins around the sun or the sun spins around the Earth, and they'll laugh in your face and tell you, well, of course this Earth goes around the sun. But as we just showed you, it doesn't work with relativity. If relativity is true, then you would never be able to know. So that's basically just a shortened presentation about how Einstein made the Earth move when all the tests and experiments showed it didn't. But that's the summary that you need to understand, is that there is no test, there is no experiment that shows that the Earth moves. So when you look up the definition of pseudoscience, and I'll go back to it one more time, when you look at pseudoscience, you need to ask yourself the question, which is the true pseudoscientific belief? If it's a collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly regarded as being based on the scientific method. Well, the one that goes based off the scientific tests and observations is the one that says that the Earth is the center and does not move. The one that is based off of men's conceptions and mathematical transform equations is the one that tells you the Earth moves. So that's all I got to say. In the end, clearly you should be able to pick out which belief is pseudoscience. If you want to believe that the Earth moves, science will never get you there. Math will, but science won't. If you want to believe that the Earth stands still, every scientific test ever performed on that subject will lend you to that belief that this Earth does not move. That's it.